Yo, what's good, everybody? Today I'm talking about Raymond Muratalla versus Andy Cruz. It was a very entertaining technical fight. 2026 is off to a terrific start. We just had Dalton Smith versus Matias to start off January. We had this in the middle of the month, and we have several great matchups next week, including Teofimo Lopez versus Shakur Stevenson. So, truthfully, I couldn't be happier. But getting into the fight, Muratalla and Cruz, this was a very competitive fight and tightly scored, in my opinion. I thought the only valid scorecard from the official judges was Max DeLuca's scorecard, which was 114-114. It was a draw in his scorecard. I didn't agree with Steve Weisfeld's 116-112 in favor of Muratalla. I thought that was way too wide. And I fucking hated Tim Cheatham's 118-110 scorecard. That was bullshit. Tim Cheatham continues to prove that he is the most corrupt judge in boxing, and the fact that he keeps judging these championship fights shows how blatantly corrupt the sport is. It's honestly fucking ridiculous. No way in hell did either fighter deserve a 118-110 scorecard. This was a very close fight, one in which I could see a 7-5 type of score for either fighter and no more. I myself, I had it a draw, but there were a couple swing rounds in there. Both fighters really showed what they're made of. And I had it scored 3 apiece after the first 6 rounds. I thought the rounds Cruz won were rounds where he actually looked a level above Muratalla, like how a lot of people were expecting him to look. In those rounds, he looked a step ahead. In my opinion, those rounds were 1, 4, and 5. He showed his class in those rounds. He was slick, tricky, elusive, sharp, and he stayed composed in those rounds. He was setting traps, and his counters were sharp and precise, and he was dictating when the action stopped and started with his lateral movement. His jab was looking nice, and his right hand found the mark in those rounds. He just looked overall more fluid and seemed to have a higher IQ than Muratalla. But the rounds Muratalla won were rounds where he imposed himself. He used his size to his advantage, and he decided that he was going to be the bigger man. He was going to be a bully. He came out in those rounds with a certain urgency he lacked in other rounds. He blanketed Andy with immense pressure and increased his volume, mainly with his jab, to keep Cruz on the defensive. He did well in those rounds to stay on top of Cruz, to be in his face always, not giving him space to breathe or time to think. And he used his jab real well to blind Cruz, to set up a backhand, and to cut off Cruz's exit points. It was a fantastic first half, but I thought the second half was actually even better. I actually thought there were closer rounds in the second half. I thought the rounds Andy won were clear. Like the rounds Muratalla won in the earlier rounds, Cruz won them similarly. He came out of those rounds with some urgency. Those rounds being rounds 8, 9, and 10. I thought in those rounds, Andy increased his work rate and his pace. He made it known to Muratalla that he wasn't just gonna get walked down. He put his punches together well in those rounds, but he stayed defensively sound. I thought he just about won those rounds by being more active without sacrificing his defense. Round 9 specifically, his jab was accurate, and he landed a flush right hand counter, which was probably the cleanest punch of the fight. Now rounds 7, 11, and 12 were all very close rounds that, to me, Muratalla just about edged. I thought his constant pressure, body work, and volume nicked it for him. I was actually very impressed by Muratalla in this fight, especially in the championship rounds, because as I just explained, Andy, to me, had just won 3 straight rounds heading into the championship rounds, but Muratalla really showed his championship heart. He stayed persistent and busy in those rounds, and he didn't let off the gas. He kept advancing and pressing the action, and with those rounds being close and competitive, it's really tough not to give it to the busier fighter. So yeah, for me, I had it a draw, 114-114. I thought Muratalla could have done better in the second half. He sort of just abandoned his jab. It was working well for him when he did use it, but he just didn't use it enough, in my opinion. But fortunately for him, the judges seem to have favored his come forward aggressive style. Overall, I thought Cruz had the cleaner work. He was, to me, more precise. He landed the more eye-catching shots. But at times, he still throws his punches as if he was in the amateurs. He threw them light and fast. And some combos he threw were without power, shoe shine type of combos where he throws 4 or 5 punches but without too much behind them. They were scoring punches for sure, but not damaging. That mixed with the fact that Muratalla was visibly much larger than Andy. Those punches really looked ineffective because they barely moved Muratalla even when they got through Muratalla's defense. Conversely, even though Muratalla didn't sit on most of his punches, they still looked effective due to his heavy hands, due to his size, and due to his strength. Despite Andy blocking a lot of them, they still physically moved him, making them appear a lot more effective. Muratalla also looked more comfortable in the fight, more in control for the majority of the fights. And this being Andy's only 7th pro fight and first 12-round fight, he looked to have unraveled a little bit in rounds 11 and 12. Maybe he gassed a little bit down the stretch because he started to lose his shape a little bit. His accuracy dropped, and he just couldn't keep up with Muratalla's constant pressure and volume. No doubt Muratalla's physicality and body punches were a factor in that, but yeah, I had it a draw. But I was very impressed with Raymond Muratalla's heart. He showed me a lot more than I expected, and I know he proved a lot of people wrong. Coming into this fight, I know a lot of people thought Cruz was a lock. They thought that Muratalla was sweet, and I'm glad he proved them otherwise. But that's it for me. I want to know what you thought of the fight. How did you score it? And who do you want these two to fight next? Muratalla looked huge in there against Andy. Maybe he should go to 140 and get in the mix there. A fight with Dalton Smith would be very interesting in my opinion. As for Andy Cruz, I believe they're exploring the possibilities of him moving down to 130. If that were the case, after he gets acclimated to the division, I want to see him against Raymond Ford or Oshaki Foster, or the winner of the fight between Nunes and Navarrete, or honestly, wait for Espinoza to move up and fight that man. That way Espinoza gets another opportunity at beating another Cuban gold medalist, and Andy gets an opportunity to avenge his countryman, a fellow gold medalist, Robisi Ramirez. That to me would be fun. But that's it for me. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope you have a wonderful day.